Thank you everyone for joining us today. We have with us various speakers, various guest speakers and professors from various faculties and universities. As we have most of our speakers already joined here with us, let's begin with the program. So to begin with, I'd like to request Professor Dr. Chandra Pokhrel sir to give a brief introduction of Rastriya Khadya Bank and a brief introduction to what we are doing in general. Professor Dr. Chandra Pokhrel holds PhD degree in agricultural science from Kyushu University, Japan. His major fields of interest are land use and soil properties. Dr. Pokhrel is associate academician at Nepal Academy of Science and Technology, NAST, and a member of the Climate Change Council, Government of Nepal. He is currently involved with Rastriya Khadya Bank as agro expert. So, sir, we would request you to please give the opening remarks and brief introduction to Rastriya Khadya Bank. Thank you.
Thank you, Vandana. So good afternoon, everybody. President of Rastriya Khadya Bank, Shankar Upreti, and his entire team. Honorable guest speaker and participant. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to the webinar series on food and agriculture and development. I also would like to take this opportunity to extend warm welcome to all the guests or key speakers of the program. So actually, in the amid of COVID pandemic, Rastriya Khadya Bank Limited Nepal has conducting a different webinar, conducting the webinar series on food, agriculture, and development. Indeed, agriculture is the mainstay of Nepal's economy, and it is of the people of hinterland. Almost about 25% of GDP comes from the agriculture sector, and are engaged in agriculture in Nepal. The abundant land resources are almost 23% of the arable land, enormous water resources, diverse agroclimatic conditions, enormous microclimatic conditions, rich in agro biodiversity and other resources are the main treasurer of Nepalese agriculture. Despite all experiences, Nepalese agriculture is lagging behind. Most of the government policies and program and planning made by the government and other organizations seems futile. So these days, country's agriculture production is deficit. Considering all the situations in 2019, Rastriya Khadya Bank Limited was established as a national level public organization. The organization or Rastriya Khadya Bank Limited, the overarching goal of these organizations are increase the agriculture production in the country, sustainable food distributions, and appropriate management of marketing. thereby ensure the food security and employment generations. Sustainable agriculture, environmental conservations, along with conservation of different resources, conservation of agriculture biodiversity, including promotion of local varieties, organic cultivations, and traditional conservation of traditional knowledge are the benchmark of this organization. In this line, or doing so, the organization has already started its cultivations, rice cultivations in different part of the country, and it has planned to extend across the countries. At the same time, this organization has set out 3 different pilot projects for the research of rice cultivation, with introducing a new and sustainable technology, which is rice duck farming. This technology is very scientifically approved in the conditions of this rising environmental issues and climate change globally. And at the same time, the organization has not only limited in the cultivation of its own production, but also the organization had a large goal to enhance or to include the farmers and farming community, as well as the local, state, and national government for the production, for the enhancement of agriculture production and employment generation. At the same time, the approach to local to national level government to collaborate each other and go to hand for the production of agriculture and ensure the food security in the country. Similarly, the government, this organization has also looked forward to collaborating with not only national or international organizations. At the end of my speech, I would like to extend my sincere gratitudes to our special speakers or honorable guests for their valuable time and considerations. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor. I finally seem to have managed my camera, so finally I'm visible to all, hopefully. So now, as our to begin with our formal session, I'd like to now welcome Honorable Mr. Pradeep Kumar Gyawali, sir. He would speak a brief about need of agricultural-based trade policy to strengthen Nepal's bilateral, regional, and multilateral relations. Honorable Mr. Pradeep Kumar Gyawali, sir, now I'd like to ask you to please speak. Before he begins, I'd like to give a brief introduction to the speaker himself. He's a Nepali politician, as we all know. He served as the Minister of Foreign Affairs from March 2018 to June 2021 under Prime Minister K.P. Sharma Oli. Prior to this, Mr. Gyawali also served as Minister of Culture, Tourism, and Civil Aviation from May 2006 to April 2007. He is a standing committee member of the Communist Party of Nepal, UML. Sir, without further ado, I would like to request you to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Vandana ji. Chair of the program, Mr. Sangroula, eminent scholars, the speakers, esteemed participants, ladies and gentlemen. Namaskar and good afternoon from Kathmandu. Let me begin by thanking Rastriya Khadya Bank for hosting this important virtual meeting focusing on the agriculture and development. I would like to express my sincere thanks to the organizers for providing me the opportunity to speak a few words on this pertinent issue. As I have learned, you are continuously hosting a series of such discourses. I am confident that the conclusion of these discourses will be valuable for the policy inputs for the government of Nepal to improve the overall policy on agriculture and trade. We all know that the development of agriculture is not only the proper for the overall development of the country, but it is the fundamental guarantee of the constitutional provision which ensure that right of food to every Nepali citizen. So right to food and food security and nutrition security are very, very important. And to materialize those fundamental rights which are envisioned in our constitution, the development of agriculture, the modernization of agriculture, and the commercialization of agriculture are extremely important. Though we all know the contribution of agriculture in overall GDP of Nepal is gradually declining, and now it contributes around 28% in our GDP. However, more than half of our population are based on agriculture, and our major workforce, productive force, is relied on agriculture. So the modernization of agriculture, commercialization of the agriculture, and making it an efficient tool to propel our overall development is extremely critical and important. It is a bit ironical fact that despite of the major, despite of the country which is based upon the agriculture, we every year import more than $100 billion worth food products from abroad. And every year, it is contributing to increase our trade deficit with neighboring countries and the countries beyond the neighbor. So to decrease the trade deficit, to make Nepal is food sufficient and self-reliant, and to make sure the fundamental right to food and right to nutrition, the development of agriculture, and to make our agriculture basically the export oriented is extremely important. We all know that there are few important policies which focus the commercialization, modernization of agriculture, and the export trade of agro products. I would like to mention some policies, major policies on that regard, like the agriculture policy 2061 speaks of focus to increase the agro products, to commercialize it, and to link the domestic and international markets, global markets, to our agriculture products. Similarly, Agriculture Development Strategy 2015-35 it emphasized to ensure the food and nutrition security and making the Nepal's agriculture more competitive in the global market. Likewise, the Trade Policy 2072 focus on the promote of export trade and collection and processing of the agro products. And in the Integrated Trade Strategy 2016 emphasized the identification of the tradable agro products and export. That means we have some very important policies which focus on the commercialization, modernization of our agriculture, so that we can make it one of the major export trade, and we can deficit out. We can decrease our trade deficit, and we can make a sustainable development in this regard. But however, the fact is, the result, the outcome so far is not so satisfactory level. As I already mentioned, every year we are importing large volume of foodstuffs, agriculture products, live stocks, and other products which is contributing to broaden our trade deficit. We have some arrangements, bilateral arrangements, regional arrangements, and multilateral arrangements, which are directed to make such an arrangement so that the concerning countries or regional alliances can develop the intra-regional bilateral trade, especially the trade of agriculture products. However, still there are some obstacles. Some obstacles are basically non-tariff obstacles, like we all know, when we want to export our primary products like tea, cardamom, coffee, vegetables, and jute products in our neighboring countries, we face various type of problem during the bilateral trade. So we are trying our best to set smooth, unhindered, and predictable type of arrangement, so that every producer, every peasant, every farmer can be assured that if I increase my growth, my product, there is a guarantee in the market, in domestic market and in the international and regional market. So that type of guarantee is very, very important to the sustainable growth of agriculture. So now we are in the process of amendment of the trade treaty with India. One of the major components of our proposal to amend the trade treaty with India is to make smooth access to the Indian markets for our agriculture products, so that Nepal can increase its export trade in the regional markets. Similarly, we are talking to the Bangladeshi government, we are talking to the Chinese government and other countries of Gulf region to improve, to increase our export trade of agricultural products. Second, when we talk about the regional, bilateral, regional, and multilateral cooperation or relation in agricultural trade, one of the important part is the global, regional, and bilateral alliance cooperation for the sustainable development of agriculture. We all know, due to the adverse effect of the climate change, farmers of every country, every part of the globe, every society, they are facing severe challenges. Some of their indigenous crops have been in the brink of elapse, extinguished. So to preserve our indigenous crops, seeds, knowledge, and make sure that there will be a continuation of our indigenous product is extremely important, and to preserve the agriculture economy from the adverse effect of the climate change is very, very important. No single country or no single society can face the adverse effect of climate change. So it requires broader level of bilateral regional cooperation on that regard. So when we talk about the agriculture development, agricultural trade, definitely to make the agricultural development more sustainable, resilient, so that the adverse effect of the climate change cannot make that big harm for the farmers is extremely important, and it requires a broader cooperation among the countries, among the societies. Second, though World Trade Organization is still facing various types of problem, but it has not been so far so influential and effective to solve the question of the agricultural trade. So we need broader consultation so that agriculture can, the problem related to the agriculture and agricultural trade can be addressed properly through a rule-based global trade system, and the small countries, developing countries, they can be assured that international arrangements are in favorable of us. They are more supportive to our concerns. So that type of arrangements is extremely important when we talk about the bilateral, regional, and multilateral arrangements, making global trade systems more favorable for the developing countries are extremely important. So having said these few points, I would like to express my sincere thanks to the National Rastriya Khadya Bank for hosting this important seminar and providing me an opportunity to say a few words on this regard. Before I would like to conclude, I would like to just say that agriculture is one of the major propeller of our development, and until and unless we make sure that our agriculture is modernized, commercialized, and we make a type of assurance to the farmers that their interests, their rights, their concerns are properly addressed, and their product are easily accessible to the domestic, regional, and global markets, and the basic price for their products is ensured, we cannot develop the agriculture, and until and unless there is remarkable agricultural development, Nepal cannot be developed, Nepal cannot be make sustainable progress. So such type of discussions, discourses, I think will be very, very important to develop some policy inputs to the policy makers and the government. I thank you all for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Honorable Pradeep Kumar Gyawali, sir. Our program is designed in such a way that in the first part of our program, the key speakers will present their ideas, and in the later part of the program, the participants will then ask the question to the presenters, and there will be a discussion in regards to the issues presented. So with this little information, I'd also like to add that the participation today is not only from the students or only from the agro experts or only from a certain specific field, but there are various individuals from different sectors. For instance, we have different agro experts attending today's session, likewise various students who are doing their MSCs or BScs in agriculture itself, along with few lawyers and also few parliamentary members from different regions. For example, we have Padma Khadka ma'am from Karnali. Likewise, we also have Dipendra Chhetri sir, who is former governor of Nepal Rastriya Bank. So with this context, I'd like to move forward and I'd now like to request Professor David Kinley to present his ideas on the issue of international perspective on food and agriculture for overall development of Nepal. Before he begins his presentation, I'd like to give a brief introduction to him. Professor David Kinley holds the chair in Human Rights Law at the University of Sydney Law School. He is also an academic panel member of Doughty Street Chambers in London, a member of the Australian Council for Human Rights, and was a founding member of Australian Lawyers for Human Rights. On top of that, he's on the faculty of various universities as well. So Professor, now the time is for you. Thank you.
Namaste. Thank you very much, Vandana, and hello everyone. Hello Geeta. Hello to all my friends there. It's night time here in Sydney. I am going to try and be as brief as possible. What Vandana told me to do was to talk about the right to food in international law, which I will do. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen with you. I have 3 slides, and I will provide you all with these slides afterwards, but I think they might just help guide my 10 minutes of discussion. So let me share my screen with you. And I hope everyone can see that. Put your thumbs up if you get excellent. I can see Geeta saying yes, so that's good. Okay, well, what I intend to do is to just briefly outline what the international legal system says about the right to food. Now, I know many of you know this, and so I'm not going to spend time dwelling on this, but what I have tried to do in these slides is to provide hyperlinks to important recent and old material that elucidates what the right to food requires of signatory states, therefore Nepal. So there's a lot more going on behind these slides. First of all, and I think this is an important point to make, the right to food is not just found in the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. It is actually found in terms of non-discrimination in the Racial Discrimination Covenant, in the Covenant against discrimination against women, the Children's Covenant, the Covenant on the Rights of People with Disability, migrant workers, elsewhere. That said, the ISESCA, the Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, is the most authoritative and express reference to the right to food in international law. And if you can follow my cursor, you can see that is in Article 11, and you can follow that yourself. Now, as you will know, there is no standalone right to food in international law. Rather, it is packaged in the right to an adequate standard of living, which includes housing as well as clothing and the right to food. One interesting point, and of course this is particularly relevant to Nepal, and that is there was no correlating right to water or sanitation. Extraordinary though that may sound, when they put the ISESCA together in 1966, they didn't include an express right to water. Bizarre, really. I've done a lot of research on this, and it's very hard to see why they omitted it. That said, however, it's now been implied by the international legal community. So the right to food includes the right to water. Article 11 in the ISESCA refers to the progressive realization. So states must be progressively increasing their access to adequate and appropriate food for their citizens. It doesn't mean, of course, that you can't take steps back if things like earthquakes happen, but you must the state has an obligation to be promoting and taking steps that increase food access and food adequacy. Importantly, that also includes international cooperation and assistance. So in other words, it's not just the tax dollars of Kathmandu, but it's also whatever dollars it can get from aid agencies and trade. Also in Article 11, and this is really quite unusual for international law, it specifically references to practicalities of food production and distribution. Normally, the international human rights law covenants do not talk about how you implement laws. They simply provide what the right is. But here, perhaps because of the importance of food back in the 50s and the 60s, but still today, they dug a little deeper and they said states have an obligation to look at how they produce and distribute food. And importantly, and especially given who sponsors this conference, this refers to not only the public sector's responsibilities, but also the private sector's responsibilities. Because always remember that the obligations under international human rights law do sit on the shoulders of governments. But those governments must ensure not only that the departments of governments, the agents of governments, cooperate and act in a way that promotes human rights, but they must also make sure that the private sector over which they have jurisdiction operates in a way that promotes and protects the right to food, including banks. And finally, just on this slide, we must never forget that civil and political rights are crucial to the question of the right to food. It's not just an economic, social, and cultural right. The rights to free speech, to association, to equality, to non-discrimination, even the right to a fair trial. These are crucial to promoting, enforcing the right to food. And of course, you have a very famous Supreme Court case involving the right to food, which emphasized that point. My second slide, I only have three. My second slide refers to these three key features in international law: that the right to food requires it to be accessible, adequate, and appropriate. This is referred to and repeated time and time again in international law. There are a number of UN bodies, and I'm just going to focus on the UN, a number of UN bodies that have helped to put flesh on the bones, as it were, of what the right to food means. And I have highlighted a few in these slides with a few of their particular recent documents or publications. There are many more, but these are ones that I think are of particular relevance today and particularly relevant to Nepal. The first is, of course, I hope most of you know a little bit about international law to know what the committees, the UN Human Rights Committee's concluding observations are. These are the comments that the committees will make to a report that is submitted by the Nepalese government, by the Australian government, by the UK government. And what I've included there in this hyperlink are the concluding observations with respect to Nepal in recent international human rights bodies. First of all, in 2014, the Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. It's interesting that in that report, there is no mention of the right to food in the ISESCA report, in the ISESCA concluding observations for Nepal. However, in the following years, in the Children's Convention, in the Elimination of Racial Discrimination Convention, follow my cursor, and in CEDAW, and in the Rights for People with Disability, in all of these concluding observations involving Nepal, there is express reference to the need to ensure that there is access to food and it is not discriminated on the basis of gender, age, racial or ethnic origin. And of course, this is focused on the post-2015 earthquake, where food and food security became an acute problem everywhere in Nepal, but of course, particularly in the further flung regions. Secondly, there are things called general comments that the committees produce. These are, as they sound, they are a fleshed out 5 to 10 pages documents that say that explain to member states what a particular right means. Now, I've highlighted 3 here, 2 in particular. One general comment in 1999, which is on the right to food. And that highlights the fact that what we're really talking about here is not so much the lack of food that's a problem in the world. This is everywhere, not just Nepal. It's the fact that people do not have access to that available food. So we, as a human race, produce enough food, more than enough food around the world. It's just that it's not equally distributed. And that's true between countries and within countries. Another general comment in 2003 is on water. And indeed, this is a very interesting one. Particularly, this general comment talks about the need for states to regulate the private sector when it's managing water and sanitation. And of course, given the prevalence and the power and the potential of water within Nepal's economy, that's of crucial importance. The private sector, not just the public sector, but the private sector plays an enormous role in the management of water and sanitation and power in Nepal. And finally, just a general comment, a recent one in 2017 talks about the business activities of all businesses, not just in Nepal or not just in respect of water, and how important it is for states to manage and regulate their private sector businesses. This is a new frontier in international human rights law. Interestingly, there have been no individual complaints from any country to the Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights that has involved the right to food or the right to water. None. They've mostly been on housing and a few other issues, health, but none yet on the right to food. So we can pass over that one quickly. The UN also has a special rapporteur on the right to food. In other words, a specialist investigator on the right to food. It's a he at the moment from the United States. And I've highlighted 3 recent reports here. One in 2019, which looks at the importance of SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly the Zero Poverty Goal of SDG 2, and how that relates to international human rights law. And then another report that he produced in 2020, which focuses on the importance of international trade. So Pradeep mentioned a few moments ago, and indeed the first speaker as well, the importance of understanding what the agricultural business means to Nepal, both internally and with respect to its trade. And it is extraordinary, I find, that the agricultural trade deficit is so heavy in Nepal. So much of your food is being imported from India when you have the potential to export so much of that food. And then finally, COVID-19 has had an impact domestically and internationally on the right to food. And there's a statement that he makes there as well, which I've highlighted. And finally, there is the Food and Agricultural Organization, which has got a policy brief which highlights a number of issues involved with respect to COVID, but also, and I'll just move to my next slide, it also focuses on food insecurity. Now, this comes in a 21 report, a very recent report on the Food and Agricultural Organization. And COVID has had a really bad impact. At least 50 million more people are now on the edge of starvation as a consequence of COVID. So it's between 720 and 811 million people. That's an enormous number of people. That's about a tenth, 10% of the world is still facing food insecurity. Altogether, that's about a third of the world's population, 2.37 billion people, do not have access to adequate food. So they're not starving, but the food is not adequate. And what's really interesting about this report is that it shows that food insecurity food security was rising over the last 5 years. And then with COVID, it has taken a very sharp dip downwards. Where has this happened? Where has this occurred? I'm afraid to say it's mostly in Asia. Most of the 800 million people that are starving are in Asia. Many of those, of course, are in India, and of course, some of them are in Nepal. There are a number in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, and there are some in Latin America, but it's still Asia that has the bulk of those starving. And this is where I will finish. This is what they face. This is a neat summation from an earlier report, 1 year before, from the Food and Agricultural Organization, where they say that people who are starving or who don't have food security are facing obstacles of securing adequate income to purchase the food or to grow the food. And therefore, their whole lives are brought to an indignity. They're not able to do the normal things because everything is based on whether they can find enough food to feed themselves and their families. And that is really the crucial feature of the right to food. Without the protection of basic, adequate access to appropriate food, all the other human rights become ephemeral. They become marginal because you simply cannot survive without an adequate diet. So, Dhanyabad.
Thank you so much, Professor. That was an interesting presentation, very much to learn. Am I audible to everyone? Okay, thank you. As our next speaker, we actually did invited Dr. Krishna Prasad Oli, who is the former member of National Planning Commission here at Nepal government. But because of some political changes and certain things, he could not make it today. Likewise, we had another speaker, Mariam Faruqi, who is the South Asia Regional Director for iProbono, but she also had an issue back home. So she need to rush to hospital at the moment, so she could not make it here today. The next speaker we have invited here today is Professor Geeta Pathak Sangroula, ma'am. And she would be discussing on the legal perspective on food and agriculture for overall development of Nepal. To give a brief introduction of Professor Geeta Pathak Sangroula, she is professor at Kathmandu School of Law. She is teaching socioeconomic rights and gender rights as well. She is the steering committee member of the Asia Pacific Masters Program on Human Rights and Democratization. She has experience of serving in the Social Welfare Council and as a chief legal advisor and the governing council member of the National Judicial Academy. Likewise, she is a senior advocate at Supreme Court, Nepal. So she would be discussing a bit on the legal perspective on food and agriculture for overall development of Nepal. So ma'am, I'd like to invite you as a speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a minute here. Okay. So thank you, Vandana, for your kind introduction. Actually, it was not that much necessary. And you know, I have like my presentation or my view, let's say. So I would be brief on the legal perspective of food and agriculture in Nepal. And my view is integral to the views I listened from Honorable Pradeep sir and David. Of course, I would love to discuss along with. It is quite interesting, David. Hello. I had a duet with Professor David Kinley, and we worked together with at Kathmandu School of Law, jointly organized program every year, Himalayan Film School. David, Vandana forgot to introduce that he is very, very much acquainted with the rural areas. Many times he has visited to Sindhupalchok, number of places, especially in the hydropower water project, along with Sydney University students doing this course in international law. And one more thing, maybe David can also contribute, Professor David, who has written excellent ICSCR commentary together with Professor Ben Saul, the professor of Sydney Uni, and also visiting professor for Harvard Law School. And I should not forget Jackie. So three fantastic minds have come up with this commentary. So Vandana, it would be good like if you also ask a couple of practices he has come up with about Nepal, and while highlighting the commentary. And this will give a lot of aspects of international, interpretation and commentaries, what he has mentioned. I think we will get a little more time because two panelists are missing. So I thought maybe I should highlight one more issue, though I have been asked to talk about national perspective, legal perspectives. But it would be complementary what Honorable Gyawali ji also mentioned about trade deficit and yet to be fully institutionalize our self-reliance. I mean, we are not yet self-reliant, and a lot of problem. Of course, the natural calamities created and many more problems are there. I can understand you, sir. But at the same time, he also highlighted about policies. How can we, compensate all these things? So you can see all the valued participants you can see instruments, interpretation, state obligation, and so on. So I would like to highlight that whatever development that Nepal has taken place, or rather I can say sifted out, and little bit also highlighted by Honorable Gyawali about the constitutional guarantee. I would request all those who are listening, the international standards, what we talk always, that whenever we talk about food sovereignty, food security, starting from food as basic human right, what David highlighted about, and then agrarian reform, protecting natural resources, the third element, reorganizing food trade, what we heard, ending globalization of hunger. See, one way or another, it is very much impacting our situation in entire development at the world arena. And then social peace. This is very interesting. Whenever we have food insecurity, and then I can even see that even impacting the poor people in the name of having food, even giving vote in the election time. So that is another reality about Nepal, that I would say that maybe this also leads what David highlighted about civil and political rights, a lot of issues, freedom from hunger, freedom from want, and so on. And of course, this is very much related with the democratic control. How much democratic control has, of course, law is excellent, fantastic, but how much do we have to talk about all these issues? Let me just go. Since 2008, we have seen remarkable shifts in the constitutional guarantees, starting from interim constitution, and then 2015's constitution enabling laws. One thing is very important, that for the first time, constitution provided guideline to have implementation through the statutes. So that was Article 47 of the Constitution. And we have jurisprudence back and forth. It is always very important that something which is guaranteed in the Constitution is seen being invoked by the court as justiciable. As the lessons we have learned, some 8 districts who are facing problem of food scarcity, And the case when filed under 1990s Constitution 2047, at the time, the court dismissed the writ petition. But the same issue when filed under the fundamental right under interim constitution, then the court came up with this issue. So I can see that, the right to food, starting from the case of Prakash Mani, and so that came up with a couple of questions that regarding fundamental right, access, obligation, role of government, and also the guidelines and the ruling of Supreme Court. The important part that the court came up with, the aspect of freedom, which is definitely the civil and political rights issues. And Article 16 of Nepali Constitution is actually the gateway to talk about a dignified right to live. And that is definitely connected with food security and food sovereignty. The court ordered to have food aid ID card, and it has been implemented in the policy. It has been implemented in writing in law. But the question is, have we been able to have, free and low cost food ID card elsewhere all over Nepal? If we have started a little bit during COVID time, of course, there was some, but then it has to be institutionalized and in the emergency food and so on. I would like to highlight a little bit about the post-Prakash Mani judicial rulings. Maybe this will be a great asset also for David to include in his edited version of commentary. Interesting part, the court also came up with that, the vicarious liability of animal owner. In Nepal, unlike developed country where there is strict rule of trespass, but here, even if people have boundary, but the animals are elsewhere and they have to watch their product and farm. So if farm is damaged by domestic animals, the vicarious liability also should go to the animal owner. That is fantastic judgment I found in 2010. And another judgment, the Supreme Court also came up with the definition of right to food. It was in 2016 after our existing constitution. So definition of right to food is not just the definition of the element, but it must include accessibility, rightly pointed out by Professor David. And of course, it has been guaranteed in the general comment and so on. So the physical availability, geographical affordability, and quality connected with migration. This case also connected with migration. In the name of searching for the means of subsistence, the people migrate inside the country and outside as a migrant worker. So this is also the consequence of lack of food security. That was the judgment. I think this is beautiful judgment. And I have just come up with 2-3 post-Prakash Mani cases. Food insecurity in the situation of earthquake, flood, and natural disaster. And it has also discussed about somewhere given the sense that food bank, maybe this is to be seriously considered. The country like Nepal, it is not possible to establish the food bank every time. So we have to see the nature and the climate and many more. And the transportation, accessibility, and quality of food, and also making sure that food is not expired and rightly distributed on right time, in right portion with quality. So that is, I think, this Rastriya Khadya Bank's program, I believe that it will be very, very much, influential or very important aspects that you have carried on. So therefore, I think I'm not going to go on a lot of very beautiful provisions that Right to Food and Food Sovereignty Act 2018 has carried on, definition, access, obligation, measures. What I like the most is the equity measures. It's not that, non-discrimination, direct discrimination, but taking into consideration the marginalized and vulnerable, and because of natural calamities, and we suffer a decade-long armed conflict even, and the political upheavals. I hope that Honorable Pradeep sir would agree with me that this process also is detrimental. If government has made one policy, and we are not sure that the exact policy will be implemented by the next government. So that is another, implementation hurdle. And this is also the concern of the democratic element and also concern with the social peace. So definitely the market and, monitoring indicators are very important, because we are not very much, we don't have sound technology like many other countries. And I was searching and I was seeing the very interesting COVID related food bank and food distribution with the large scale that United Kingdom has actually started. That can be one of the success stories in order to go forward, because UK also said that and realized that we are so-called developed country, but there are so many people, urban poor people, migrant workers, they are facing food insecurity. So I think this is also very important. I have to just quickly highlight. The important part is, do we have lack of resources, or we are poor in mobilization of resources? Look at the budget. Every year we have now federal structure. We aim that federal structure will work more. I'm very much particular on this, that if the budget every year returns, and our budget development is a kind of like seasonal development, at the end of the fiscal year, we go for utilizing the budget. So if we planned to implement on right time throughout the year, establishing the food bank or food storage, food distribution planning scheme, and then it will definitely work. But it has to be throughout the year, not just 1 month or 2 months to finish the budget. So this will not work. So I always say that Nepal actually is not poor. I think David would also agree with me that you have seen so many natural resources that we can actually exploit, which we have not yet exploited. So that can be utilized where appropriate. See, every place is not suitable for all these product storage market. I want to stick more on enforcement of law. Whatever law we have, there is no problem in law. We have replicated many more provisions exactly from international standards that we have that. But the problem is, what steps to ensure sustained food security and freedom from hunger in both the food surplus and food deficit districts, food deficit places generally, and particularly for the marginalized community. This is question number 1 to discuss about. Second, have we been able to fulfill the immediate needs? If yes, whether it is a kind of donorship or charity-based approach or rights-based approach. Because this is connected with dignity. So food sovereignty is connected with dignity. And third, how far international assistance, David, again, I'm quoting him, what is the status of international assistance? See, we have World Food Program, and Nepal has also the strategic plan from 2019 till 2023 with the World Food Program. And WFP, I don't know all of you are acquainted or not, WFP is the only organization which has received Nobel Peace Prize. Normally, organizations do not receive, but because of its activities, it has received. But the point is, have we been able to cash out whatever opportunity we have to join hand with the WFP? This is, I'm about to finish. So the status needs to be reviewed with the WFP and connected with the health issues in COVID situation, and preparedness, mobilization, and coordination status. And also, I think this is the time that to consider number of sad stories of farmers throwing or selling in a nominal price or nothing their products for almost nothing in the lockdown situation. I was hearing that, ₹1 kilo and even less than, they sell the tomato, and then they throw out. So that is the situation. So why have we not been able, when we circular for COVID related circular, and in coordination with the concerned agencies, and then go for, okay, we have this lockdown, but the farmers having no transportation, no public transportation, will be provided the government sponsored public transportation, so that they can come up with their product and have their market in a safety condition. So simple thing, if one person or the driver with the PPE and then goes a couple of places, and this can be run by the federal local government. This is why that we have local government. Otherwise, we would have not been like centralized situation would have more. So the farmers are not being able to buy seeds. So what should we talk about? Like, my constitution, my law, my court have ensured all these things. But if they are not in the hands, the laws are dead later until we give life to them. So the success definitely lies on state, non-state actors' responsibility, especially bank and the corporate social responsibility. I would like to highlight, because it has not been discussed. The corporate social responsibility in India, 2%. In Nepal, less than 2%. And even people don't know about that. So this is what I wanted to highlight. Therefore, what incentive for sustainable agriculture we have to review. And given situational, in the given situation of COVID compelling them to sell, all this need to be also overviewed. And genuinely speaking, that farmers are the most neglected part, and it is captured by the multinational corporations elsewhere. So what happened that we have departmental store, we the people go for online food package we receive, and we go for we go to departmental, we never ask the price, but the farmers who are selling outside in the street, whenever they have time in rainy season, and there is a bargaining. So that is also the honesty and morality question. The last, I request the organizer, especially this is the right place, to go for baseline survey of implementation of legal guarantees, and wherever appropriate, thematically and on the whole system. So that's what I wanted to highlight. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your excellent presentation. We sure did learn a lot from today's presentation as well. Now, our Honorable Pradeep sir has requested me that he's in a bit of a rush, so he needs to leave. So if there is any questions or comments specifically for him, we'd request the participants to please come forward and ask the questions. Till that time, so I have collected one question. This is asked by Vishnu Basnet sir. He's from the army background, if I'm not wrong. So he is asking to you that, good afternoon, sir. You have been working for a long time in Nepal government as senior minister, and you are a good son of farmer background from Gulmi. With this background, I have one query. So do you think that the government still need to address the farmers' difficulties to survive in agricultural ground? If yes, how? So that's one question for Pradeep sir. We request others to please direct your question to Pradeep sir if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you, Bandanaji. Thank you, Vishnuji, for your very pertinent question. Yes, of course, I am from the farmer's family background. So, though since long I've been engaged in political activities and political spectrum, however, I am quite aware about the difficulties, problems, concerns, and constraints of the Nepali farmer. Yes, government has a lot of things to do to address the difficulties and problems of the farmers. Though we have been trying our best to address and make the government policies more pro-farmer, pro-peasantry, so that the agriculture profession can become a prestigious and sustainable profession. However, still there are many, many problems. Yeah, I think first of all, we should discuss and we should focus on the one major thing, major problem we are facing now is the reluctancy of the younger generation in agriculture sector. No youth will be very, very interested to dedicate his entire life in agriculture sector, because he knows that there is no any guarantee of sustainable income. Society doesn't look as a prestigious profession of agriculture, and there is no any guarantee of the fundamental price for each product, our product. So how we can attract the younger generation, because my father was totally a farmer. I started my career as a school teacher before joining the full-time politics. I'm not sure whether my son will be interested to attach himself to this file. So to attract the newer generation is extremely important. Second, as Geeta Sangroula ma'am also talked about the migration. Many parts of the remote villages now they have been deserted. They have been transformed as a barren land. Nobody wants to harvest there. So to make sure that no single part of the land should be barren, that should be cultivated, that problem also should be addressed. So access to the land, fundamental facilities for agriculture like irrigation, seeds, fertilizers, and technology. Third, guaranteeing the fundamental basic prices to the products and make access to the market so that no any intermediary bicholia can make unnecessary profit laying between the producers and the consumers, and the social security for the farmers in their last part of their life, especially when they being aged, they can be guaranteed from various social security schemes. These are the very, very important part. Our government has tried to address these problems, but I may say that still there are a lot of things to be done, and I hope that gradually those problems will be addressed. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. We have another question for you. This is in regards to the natural calamities and global warmings and issues as such. The question is asked by Rajiv Raman Neupane, who is asking you, there are farmers who are facing huge loss due to natural calamities, global warmings every day, but still government could not address them in real time. The government process of addressing them, the subsidies policies are not for the real farmers. Still, real farmers are not recognized. The government subsidies distribution policy should be transparent and should focus according to the unit production of the farmers. So he further states that the production cost is so huge that the market price could not meet the minimum requirement of the farmers. In actual agriculture is the profit-oriented business, but the bitter truth is the real farmers and commercial growers are losing their status, marching towards poverty. That's what he wants you to address as well, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Nirvani. You raised a very pertinent question. Yes, the adverse effect of the climate change, the increased number of the natural calamities every year has created a serious problem in our agriculture sector, and the farmers are the major victims of those calamities. Though the climate change and global warming is not caused by Nepal itself. Rather, Nepal is contributing to mitigate the adverse effect of climate change. Our Himalayas and our almost 44–45% of forest and jungles, they are contributing positively to mitigate the adverse effect of the climate change. However, we are being victims of those mistakes which were never done by ourselves. So to mitigate those effects, we need bilateral, regional, and global collaborations, which I already mentioned in my initial statement and remarks. Second, to address the concerns of the victims of the natural calamities, and to guarantee the subsidies and grant assistance which is provided by the government to the real farmers, it is extremely important. Government very recently has decided to introduce ID card for the farmers, so that we can identify the real producers, real farmers, and those grants, those assistance, and those subsidies or relief packages which the government provides that can be raised to the real needy people. So that type of ID card is extremely important. One thing I would like to express. Second, as Constitution has been guaranteed, to land access to the land to the those people who have been landless due to the various reasons, especially for Dalits. Now the access has been gradually implementing to them, and we are trying our best to make sure that the government support should reach to the real farmers. No any subsidiary, no any intermediary, no any that type of other unwanted elements can take those benefit provided to them. For once again, I would like to emphasize the need of the proper connection between the producers and the markets, and proper coordination between producers, market, and consumers. The major problem we are facing now is the problem of the caused by the intermediary. The vegetable farmer of Dhading, Kabre, he receives very small amount of the price for his vegetable product. But as a consumer, I live in Baneshwar, and I have to pay a huge amount for those products. But who is taking the benefit? Those intermediaries, those bicholias are taking the benefit. The major challenge for the agriculture development, and to ensure that agriculture profession is secured, it is sustainable, we should break the chain of those bicholias, those intermediaries, and government is trying to make significant reform and improvement in this regard. And I think organizations like cooperatives and policy think tanks like Khadya Bank can play an important role to have a proper access between the farmers and the consumers or markets. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We have another question for you, and I guess that would be the last question to Honorable Sir. The question goes as, I would like to ask Honorable Sir, when will be poor and uneducated farmers to get subsidiaries access for power or modern agricultural tools and machineries to cultivate the products, harvest activities, and so on. This question is asked by Dipendra Bhandari, and he wants to know that is there any projected time frame so as to when the farmers will be facilitated? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Devenji. Those issues are on the process. So far, I am aware, government is providing various type of packages to the real producers to have the subsidized interest rate from the Agricultural Development Bank and other government banks, relief packages for the production groups, and some subsidies or grant in their production. So there are various types of packages and incentives. The major problem is how to make sure that those incentives have been reached to the needy people, to the real farmers, real producers. That is the problem. So that's why government is introducing, as I already mentioned, to have a ID card to the farmers so that they can easily access, and technology, especially the information technology, can play an important role. If every farmer provided a smartphone and their own apps and the direct linkages to the concerned authorities or agencies, then they can follow up, they can regularly be updated about the packages, about the incentives, about the assistance or grants which have been provided to the government, and we are trying to improve this situation. Having said that, I would like to express my sincere thanks again, Ms. Vandanaji, and through you to all the organizers. It was an interesting discussion. I would like to express my sincere thanks to Professor Kinley and Geetaji as well. It is an opportunity to me to learn a lot about your very valuable presentation. Just I'd like to say a few words so that Nepal has made substantive progress on the ensuring the fundamental rights, not only the civil and political rights, but the economic, social, and cultural rights as well, like right to food, right to shelter, right to basic education, right to basic health, right to environment as well. And now the challenge is how to materialize those fundamental rights in reality. We have enabled many acts, but in practice, there are still many challenges, and I hope that such a discussion will contribute to make concrete policy recommendations to the policymakers. Where are the areas to be reformed, improve? It was indeed an interesting discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. We are extremely grateful for your time as an organization and individually as well. Thank you so much for your expertise and for your time. Now, Professor David, we have some questions for you. There are two questions to be precise. First one states that under the umbrella of right to food, still many people are in the condition of fight to food. As an expert, how do you help and suggest us to overcome this problem? That's one question to you. Whereas another question is asked by Appeal Ji. He says that As we all know, legal provisions act as the most influencing environment for any kind of business, and it does the same for agribusiness as well. As I know about Australia, more than 99% of Australian agricultural business are wholly Australian owned, with Australians owning 88% of the Australian agricultural land. But in Nepal, we are slowly going to liberalize our economy and opening foreign investment in agri sector too, and which has opened new and serious discourse here in Nepal. Can you add some ideas about how Australian laws are playing role in such arena? Why and how Australia has maintained agribusiness over there? I'd love to know about Australian experiences regarding this so that we may have the reference for our public discourses as well. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Vandana. Thank you for the questions. Dealing with the first one first, of how you help the fight for food. Actually, if Bishnu Basne doesn't mind, I'm going to repeat something that I wrote to him in answer to a question that he sent to me directly, and that is, I really do think that the question of political power is at the heart of what a developing economy like Nepal can achieve, as it moves from being a basically subsistence farming, agriculturally based economy into one that perhaps starts to export power, to increase its capacity in tourism, to start to log and export its natural resources. The farmers can either be left behind or be a very powerful force to be reckoned with. So insofar as the subsistence farmers can collectively have a powerful political voice, and that could be at the local level, the district level, or the national level, then things will change. And as I said to Bishnu, look at Europe, look at Germany and France, look at their farmers. They are well looked after. Why? Because they have real political clout, and the politicians cannot afford to ignore them. Now, of course, not all of them are subsistence farmers, but some of them, many of them, are small affairs. They're not big agricultural entities like in Australia. So political power, I think, is crucial. And actually, I'm going to finish that particular answer with a question to all of you. And I was there in 2000, just before COVID in 2020, and discussing with many people in Nepal about the importance of the localization, the democratization of your politics. So, you know, Nepal now has 77 districts, 753 local authorities. You have many, many more people involved in politics than you did before. So a question to you would be, has that allowed subsistence farmers, poor farmers, to really have a voice, to collectively have a voice? I don't have an answer to that, obviously, and maybe you don't either, but that seems to me where that power might rise up. It will take a generation, but it might rise up. The second question, I am no expert, I'm afraid, on ownership of land in Australia, but I can say this much, that all countries, including Nepal and certainly Australia, have some form of foreign investment review board. That's what we call it in Australia. So that means that any foreign entity that is going to purchase materials, installations, or land in Australia of any significant value will be scrutinized. They must submit themselves to the Foreign Investment Review Board. Now, that means, therefore, that they can control how much land is bought by Chinese or Japanese or Nepalese or Indian farmers. And if the policies are there to limit that amount of land being purchased, then they will limit the amount of land being purchased. Now, in a position like Nepal, you might say, well, we want the income. We want the Chinese and the Indians and whoever else, the British, the Europeans, we want them to invest in Nepal, and we would like them maybe even to purchase land. Well, the way around that, as so many developing countries do, is not to give them individual exclusive right, but to insist that a foreign corporation owns land in a joint venture with a Nepalese company or a Nepalese individual. And so therefore there's a sort of joint ownership, but the money still comes in from the outside, but there's still a sort of lock, an anchor in Nepal itself. Now, as I say, I'm not an expert in agricultural land. I do some work in finance, but I'm certainly not an expert in investment law either. But that's the broad strategy that developing and developed countries adopt when they're dealing with floods of investment coming into a country to buy up its land or buy up its resources or buy up its real estate.
Thank you, Professor. We have another question for you. Some people are not getting adequate food. Some of them are dying due to lack of food, but many food is getting rotten and being wasted. So the problem is not the production of food. The problem is in the distribution. He asks two major questions to you. One is, what are the major problems of scientific distribution of food? That would be one. Whereas another would be, what are the main solutions to overcome this food problem? So you're muted.
Thank you very much. That's such an interesting question. It really is such an issue. In fact, just on that, I didn't have the time, of course, to show you this, but I'm going to share my screen again, and I'm going to allow you to just very quickly look at this graph, which goes straight to the heart of what the questioner has asked. This is food loss by region. So if you look, the red is where consumers, you and I, where we waste the food. Whereas the gray area is production or retailing. In other words, produce that is lost by falling from the trees, that rots in the silos, or is put in a truck that isn't properly refrigerated, or the mice eat it, or whatever. Now, isn't it interesting that the rich countries, which is Europe and North America, we as individual consumers, people like me, waste a huge amount of food. I mean, so do our producers. But when you go to sub-Saharan Africa, or where you go to South and Southeast Asia, which is where you are, people who eat food don't waste it. It's the production of food and the distribution of food. So I'll stop sharing that screen, but how do you solve this? Well, again, I am no expert in this, but I can tell you this much, that I do know that initiatives coming out of organizations like the WTO, the World Bank and the ADB, what they're seeking to do, they often call these aid for trade initiatives. So it is aid, it's development aid, but they're linking it to trade relations. So it's got a commercial dimension to it, it's not just a grant. But some of the things that they're focusing on is to try and provide finance to producers and distributors of food, to make sure that the precious food that they do harvest is not ruined from the field to the plate. And this was a point that Honorable Pradeep was making, wasn't it? He was saying you've got to connect the producer with the distributor, with the consumer. And I mean, that is absolutely right. You've got to make sure that that is as seamless as possible. And how do you do that? And, you know, if people don't have the, enough fuel or power to ensure that their generator keeps yogurt or milk cool, then it rots, or cheese cool, it rots. So all of these features that determine whether food that is grown in the fields can reach your plate is probably more important than how much food you can grow on the land. And you are such a rich country in terms of your resources, in terms of your terroir as well, of the land. You can produce a lot. But I would suggest that probably the biggest problem that you're facing, along with many other developing countries, is how do you make sure that what's produced is not just feeding the farmers themselves, but is getting out to the communities, to Kathmandu, because the Kathmandu people they're not subsistence farmers. You've got to get food to them, and you don't import it from India. You bring it from the fields in the south of the country. How do you do that? So I'm afraid I don't have a real solution to that, other than saying that's where policies, government policies, and I hope the Honorable Pradeep is pushing that connection, that is where those policies must be focused, it seems to me.
Thank you, Professor. Now, as we have exceeded our time limit, we have two questions for Geeta ma'am. The first question is related with the brokers or the bicholias, and this is again asked by Vishnu Basnet sir. He says that how can we overcome this big problem of brokers or bicholia, and how do you support and suggest us to do so? That's one question. Whereas another question is by Sarita Neupane, who is food and nutrition student. She asks that, as you've mentioned earlier, that Nepal is not poor. With regard to this statement from the legal perspective, how can our country achieve sustainable development goals number 2, that it would be zero hunger? Is there any right to food enshrined in our constitution and guiding policies to achieve the goal of the constitution regarding food sovereignty?
Thank you very much, Vandana, and thank you very much, Vishnuji and Saritaji. 3 words to respond Vishnuji's question. 3 words, actually 2 words, if monitored closely: transparency and accountability. Transparency and accountability, because the monitoring mechanism, we got federal system for the reason that everything will be monitored from local bottom to top to bottom, right? We have federation and all. The question is, we have to understand, and here I would also like to, mix the question of Saritaji also. The Constitution, of course, guaranteed in interim Constitution that was food sovereignty. And I asked some of the drafters that what exactly is meant by food sovereignty. And I don't want to spell out the name, but I got the answer that, well, this is a very popular word. So we found internationally recognized in many literature. So we put in the interim constitution. But actually, food sovereignty is having a number of elements, and then security. So coming again to, the food, and also for the product, the sale, this seed, how can brokers, or what in Nepali language we call it like bicholia, because here David is also hearing. So the brokers also getting, and the middle person. So the right person is not really getting the access to market. There are always the brokers in between. The problem is security. If it is a security matter, food security, then our law, along with food sovereignty, food security, there is no problem, Saritaji, in the Constitution and Supreme Court's order, I already spelled out. But the problem is, we have to understand that when there is immediate need, as David also highlighted, like immediate need needs to be taken care immediately, responded immediately. So there is no time. For example, if the time is going to sell out the, to preserve the seed and to sell out the seed, and honestly speaking, we have not yet developed the scientific technology research. Yeah, we have research. I'm not saying there are tremendous research, but the thing is whether they are accessible to the people. Now also I am also thinking like we are speaking in English and many people don't have access. That's why I ask organizer at least some, maybe this is my suggestion, that if we are a Nepali person speaking, then we can introspect the problem of the community and by speaking in Nepali, and then pick up the problem and come up with some resolutions. Of course, you have many programs conducted in Nepali, but this is also very, very important issue that Vishnuji also raised, that bichaulia, just allow me that bichauliaहरूलाई कसरी कारबाही गर्ने, okay, what actions there, what the law says about. So this is as rightly pointed out, subsistence farming, and this is, so that I can give you one mechanism, for example. So we have Provincial Food Council in the law, that 2018's we got this law, right? And it requires to keep the record. So record means, when we talk about food security and sovereignty, records starting from the seed to fertilizer to storage, production, distribution, and everything, the record of everything, record of all farmers, and genuinely, whether they are doing or they are frustrated. So this is also Provincial Food Council needs to do along with National Food Planning. The second is coordination committee. We have also in the law created local government, province and federal government, and all the mandate has been given to the local body to manage all these kind of issues. But the thing is, subsidized seeds is a problem. So how much seed do we have? The record, of course. How much seed do we have? Fertilizer do we have? Data. Where are they being distributed? The accountability. When? Whether on right time or the food is being, seed is being distributed, the time has already gone. So the farmers are keeping those seeds and that goes wastage. So when? The time is very important because of the expiry of the seeds, quality of the seeds, and timing of the cultivation, farming. So how much and to whom? So the genuine farmers are getting that or somebody else. And you have rightly pointed out that, so in case of, you reminded me, I will share the link to Bandanaji, and Bandanaji will share the link to all of you. The Supreme Court has come up with one interesting judgment. I found that if the assigned tasks are not being discharged by the concerned authorities, for example, distribution, storage, sale of all these things, in case of anything, if security is food security, food sovereignty is found violated, then even departmental action can be taken. This is what Supreme Court said about. Go for departmental action. Vibhagiya karwai garnus. Okay, so if we talked about the security agencies, just compare security, our day-to-day security, our physical security. Our physical security is connected with food security and all subsistence measures. In case of physical security, if violated, there are the mechanisms like Nepal police and all. Then why not we have the food security officer like that, a trained, going and monitoring that about this, accountability and transparency. So, definitely there is no problem in law. I am repeating on and on. So Saritaji, I'm again repeating because I did not have time. So the language, earlier we used more of food sovereignty, and now we have kept more of food security on all time, including land and all issues. But the point is whether federal structure is properly working and trained and they are fully aware, or the genuine farmers are not getting their rights. So this is very important. So I hope that so we can work, we can maybe give this task also to the research, to the academic institutions in a very low cost. We can carry on, and we'll ask students to come up with some research, being involved at the local level, and then collecting data and coming up with this report. So this is my proposal. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. As we have exceeded our time limit, but Mr. Bholaman Singh Basnet, he's an agro expert and a principal scientist and a rice expert who wants to comment something. I'd ask Bhola sir to please give a brief comment on the issue.
Oh, thank you, Bandanaji. Actually, if there is time, I will take a little more time. You see, my presentation will be the practical one. How to make the country self-reliant in rice production, not only in theoretical way, but in practical way. I have one comment on the theme or agenda of today's seminar. You have written agriculture and development, and there is other commonly used words, research and development, you see. And all the time we have problem with research and development. If we say research and development, R&D, what we should say is that research for development. or agriculture for development, we should say like that. This is one of my suggestions. Because all the time there is problem of coordination. And you see that we are talking of the right to food. Nepal Constitution has written right to food.
Yeah.
If we have production, then only we can distribute. Without production, how can we say that it is right? Food, right to food is in your constitution. Should you depend on others even to live? No, we have to make our country self-reliant. And from rice research point of view, you see, how can we make the country self-reliant in rice? Because rice security is food security in Nepal, not only in Nepal, but in Asia itself. Rice security is food security because more than 50% of the world population depend on rice as a staple food. When we come to Asia, more than 90% rice is produced as well as consumed in Asia, you see. So in Nepal also, you see, as economic or GDP growth depends on rice production. You see, when the rice production increases, the GDP growth also increases and vice versa. And there is 7% contribution of rice in GDP and about 21% contribution of rice in agriculture GDP. So that is has a huge contribution. So actually there was, you see, there was a global food crisis in 2007, 2008. And at that time, our neighboring country did, you see, they banned the non-basmati rice and wheat for 4 years. And they allowed basmati rice, which is eaten by the rich people. So that was the system. And from that point of view, what I raised the question is that even if we cannot import rice from the neighboring country and we are not self-reliant in rice, means even if we have money, we cannot buy rice, which happened in 2007-8, and it can happen in future also. So we have to make our country self-reliant in rice. So how can we make self-reliant in rice, you see? As a rice expert, what I say is that if we follow only 2 or 3 points, you see, it is my theoretical as well as practical example. We can select rice seeds based on scientific principle or specific gravity-based principle. If we follow that, we can increase 10 to 50% rice, 15% rice production. And in Nepal, you said there are 2 types of rice, choite rice and monsoon rice, Barse dhan, choite dhan. So choite rice has 20 to 25% more yield as compared to the monsoon rice. And we are growing 1,400,000 or 1,500,000 hectare under monsoon rice, which gives lower yield. And in case of choite rice, you see, we have only in 1.5 lakh hectare only out of 15 lakh hectare. So in choite rice, there are 2 conditions. We need irrigation. That is one important thing. And other one is that at the time of harvest, there is monsoon season. So the farmer need the dryers. If you can provide that dryers, then we can make our country easily self-reliant in rice production, you see. So most of our farmers are small holder, you see. So we should have one concept, small farmer, large field concept with the successful technological intervention. That is one thing. And our system should be rice-based farming, you see. So what we should say, food security, nutrition security, profitability and sustainability. I am going to finish. To get success, you see, it is said, research, push and market food. So if we produce more, then we should have guaranteed market also. The marketing intelligence is also must. And the last point is communication is, most of the time we missed communication in the past. Because most of our scientists, you see, they lack in salesmanship. They are not proactive. They are very weak communicators. So this thing, a trend has to be changed. And when you review the last 50, 60 years, you see, we never inbuilt program and budget for communications. That we did a blunder. So now onwards, my suggestion is that in every agriculture project, there must be program and budget for communication too. So whatever the success technology we have now, you see, our program is going nationally and even internationally. So communication also is very, very important thing. And it helps the farmer to have a technical know-how and field level know-how. So these are some of the points I want to raise. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bolaman sir. I believe there was one question to both of these speakers from Professor Dr. Chandra sir. Sir, I request you to please be brief.
Thank you, Professor David and Professor Geeta. So actually very nice presentation. I have some queries about the some. Sorry, can you hear me? Am I audible? Okay. So actually we have 4 pillars of food security. The one thing is that if the government, the first pillar is availability of the food security. So if we go theoretically, if we talk a theory or a principle, so if you in the name of commercialization and industrializations, so in the context of Nepalese business, agriculture business, it all goes to the private sector. So I think this is one of the main issues or main problems to the main causes of food deficit in the country, because it has been considered as a business. So that's why they are not the government or policymakers or government or politicians are reluctant to promote the agriculture sector, rather than they support to the business. So I think this is the problem. So I have one question to David. So if we have a foreign assistant in food, so obviously there is no doubt large number of the peoples are just they take away from the food insecurity. At the same time, a chunk of the populations and are just pushed in the out of business. Just they reliant, or just they depend, or they rely on the food assistance rather than promote their local food productions. That is my queries. Is really food assistance is helping to the food security in Nepal? And another is, Geeta madam, I have one query is that why Nepal government is reluctant, or our government policymaker are reluctant to make the to patenting our agriculture resources, as well as some traditional knowledge. So actually we have no single patent. Even the government and policymakers are not allowed to easily allowed to the patent, even in the within a domestic patent or maybe petty patent. So I have these queries. Thank you. That's all. Okay.
Vandana, did you want me to quickly respond or not, Vandana?
Yes, Professor, please.
Okay, I will be very quick because I'm conscious of the time. I think you're right. Food assistance is not a long-term or sustainable solution. Food assistance is only ever there to be temporary and humanitarian, to stop people starving. So if it becomes entrenched, it's a failure of government policy, frankly. If that happens and people are long-term reliant on assistance, it's a disaster. It's got to be dealt with in the short term, when there's an earthquake, when there's a flood, when there's a landslide or whatever. But then people are given the requisite capacity to rebuild and replant and feed themselves or export or whatever. If I could just also say that with respect to your question about commercialization and the rich or farmers and the agricultural sector getting all the profits, the private sector, that also, I'm afraid to say, is a policy issue, isn't it? Because you can regulate that sector if it may be politically unsound and difficult to do so, but you've got to. And then, of course, ultimately, you've got to tax them. And any developing country struggles with setting up a viable, long-term, sustainable tax system. It's incredibly difficult, even in rich countries. But that ultimately is how you deal with private profit. You tax it and you redistribute.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Geeta ma'am, I would now request you to.
I will answer. Thank you very much. Chandra sir, it was indeed a very good question. Yes, we have somewhere that we have been facing problem of patenting agricultural resources. See, it's not totally reluctant because I have seen also some of the programs. I personally participated in one program where government had organized and talking about how to go for patenting our agriculture products and all. So somewhere I feel that either there are a couple of components, not just the reluctance, but the reason maybe the knowledge factor, a lot of knowledge factor, because we deploy the people in the policy body to take the decision and who are really influential, but not really expert or at least having knowledge in the area. I hope you understood that this is a highly politicized matter, not really giving credit to those who really know, at least nobody is perfect, but at least know. My student, one of my students had done research on patenting some of the indigenous product, but he faced, he came up with a lot of problem of the registering our indigenous product and losing the creativity. They said like, no, it doesn't fall, and this doesn't meet this criteria, that criteria, and that was prolonged. You are right. So somewhere we have not been able to understand the agrarian or intellectual property rights issues, indigenous products issues, and keeping our indigenous identity, which is the pluralism. In fact, socialism and pluralism in the constitution is very much fit into our indigenous, respecting our indigenous product. That is the identity that actually will give our identity in front of world arena. So that's like, I think, sui generis. I think that this is also one aspect. Another is there is a short time. I think David also will agree with me that somewhere this part is also connected with the cultural and then scientific innovative aspects of intellectual property right. And then I was going through the general comment 25 that complemented or supplemented general comment 21 of the Economic, Social and Cultural Rights Covenant. There is a committee monitoring body, which has already been highlighted by David, that the committee came up with the new general comment, that is general comment number 25. You please have a look that how can we make our people aware so that we can register all these, our product, and we will not lose. In this regard, like India is quite smart, they have at least made and came up with some ideas, and this is how that sometimes they are fighting for basmati rice and with Pakistan. And so I think the time has come that to keep our identity alive and respect indigenous product and indigenous people. So this is the pluralism. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. And as we have exceeded our time limit by much, now I would like to conclude this program. But before going, I'd like to give a brief notice regarding our next program, which would be on July 23rd. So with this information, I thank both the presenters who have exceeded and stayed well beyond their time limit as well. Thank you so much for staying this late, and for all the participants as well who have asked very pertinent questions and have very much interested in this regard as well. So thank you so much for your time, everyone. With this, I'd request the IT team to please close our session today. Thank you, professors.